Samantha Tonge from Laboratory Marketing again, and I'm doing another one of my expert interviews that's either within marketing or connected to marketing in some way. So today I'm talking to Jonathan Downie from Integrity Languages, and he's an interpreter. So, Jonathan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so thank you for saying I'm an interpreter. My job is to turn language barriers into opportunities. So personally, I do conference and business interpreting between French and English, but my secret sauce, if you like, is that I'm what you call a consultant interpreter. So I build teams of interpreters and give research-backed advice to clients in industry, in commerce, in NGOs. And the idea then being that if they have an event they want to put on, or they have a client they're looking to woo, I'm not just building the team for them and finding the right specialist interpreters. I'm giving them advice on the technology to use. I'm giving them advice on whether they should use machine interpreting or in-person interpreting. And also because I've been speaking in public speaking since about the age of 13, I also offer training for speakers who've never worked with interpreters before. It's surprising how often speakers get on stage and say things and instantly regret them 5 minutes afterwards when they realize they've accidentally insulted someone or accidentally messed up. And so as a public speaker myself, I've got the ability to chat to speakers beforehand, preferably months beforehand, and just talk through what it is they're trying to do, what it is they're trying to achieve, how to use PowerPoint and visual aids effectively, and that kind of thing.
Yes, that is a skill. You see a lot of death by PowerPoint, don't you?
Well, I've got to the stage where a lot of the time now I refuse to use PowerPoint. I'm now realizing that people have seen so many PowerPoint presentations back to back that having like a little visual aid, I became famous for a little while amongst translators and interpreters because I was the speaker who once pretended to fall asleep during his own talk. I was speaking about marketing and speaking about how a lot of people tend to just want the clients to come to them and don't want to go out and do the legwork themselves. So I talked about the kind of inbound marketing gone wrong and said, well, I'll tell you what, if that's what marketing is, and I laid down on the stage and said, okay, if that's what marketing is, I'm going to go to sleep and just wait for them to come. And it was my way of making the point that, inbound marketing is wonderful, but inbound marketing is not sleeping marketing.
Yes. Oh, completely. Yeah.
And I've heard people say, word of mouth is the best way to market, or inbound marketing is superior. And they think that means that they can sit home, pet their dog, and the clients will just come to them.
That'd be nice.
It'd be lovely.
Yes, quite a lot of work involved in getting your inbound marketing right. It's not as simple as just sitting there.
Well, also inbound marketing seems to be dependent on a lot of outbound marketing.
Oh yeah, and that's a very good point. It's getting the balance right. It's not just, and if you rely on any one tactic, you're not going to get your message through, no matter what you do.
Well, it's also things like kind of going a bit off topic here, but I had a revelation a while back when I'd been trying to do the usual thing that a lot of interpreters will apply to lots and lots of agencies and just send out hundreds of CVs. And I eventually got to the point where that was getting me nowhere and I was just feeling completely fed up. And so I thought, well, maybe I can find a way of marketing that I actually enjoy. So I started networking, I started writing, I started doing public speaking. And suddenly I realized that marketing could be fun if you do it in a way that works for you. So not everyone's going to want to go out and do public speaking and do networking, but it's amazing the difference when you just happen to be in the right place because you're doing the thing that comes naturally to you anyway.
True. I mean, obviously, as you can probably imagine, there's not an area of marketing that I don't think is brilliant. Because it's going to be useful for one of my clients.
you need it, and there's the thing is, you'll need it somewhere. And I came across someone recently who said they'd had a lot of success from direct mail, like through the post marketing. And I was ready, it was just at the point where I thought, that kind of stuff's dead. I put most of that into a recycle bin. As well, actually, for some people who maybe don't have access to a computer or don't want to buy online, or for whatever reason prefer to receive things in mail,
to hit their desk at the right moment they happen to need it.
Yeah, and it's like I now have colleagues who send postcards to their favorite clients. And, I might send Christmas cards, but I thought, a random postcard in the middle of the year for no reason, just saying, hi, I was thinking of you, could be taken the wrong way, but it could be just a way of reminding people that you still exist.
Yes, and at the moment, because everyone, so much has gone online, people delete far more emails than they put post in recycling, because these days it's actually a bit exciting when something comes through the post, especially if it's a letter, that isn't a bill or a statement.
Or the other one is we've just had an election in Scotland. The amount of political stuff that came through the door.
Oh yes.
but this the thing is, it seems to be timing, and it seems to also be. I'm realizing that the kind of people that I want to work with will hang out in the kind of places that I want to be.
Yes.
And trying to parse the grammar of that sentence is difficult. But the idea is that if I want to work with gregarious, outgoing people, doing an email blast probably isn't going to be the best way to hit them.
Yeah.
And so I'm not a natural marketer, but I've learned through my own mistakes the kind of things that actually work for me.
Yeah. And every business is different. So it's great you found what works for you. So what are the sorts of things that it's a lot of businesses are starting to build, they're starting to think, especially now that we're all online, people are working from home, that I think for lots of people the world has opened up for them. I know I took on my first international client this year. They purely work in English, but a lot of people are probably starting to think about other countries where there is a language barrier, where they need to start to think about what are the sort of things they need to think about in terms of foreign languages if they want to go into that market.
I think the first thing that I would say is that languages don't exist on their own. They represent a kind of wider world of culture and different ways of doing things.
Yep.
I was once at a business negotiation where you had someone from New Zealand and some people from France, and the guy from New Zealand, practically as soon as our bottoms were on the comfy sofas, said, "Okay, let's get on with it. How much money do you want?" Which in some countries is okay. Even in Scotland, we would find that a little bit OTT.
Yeah.
But what happened with that meeting is the entire meeting was a mess until it came time for dinner. And then once the wine starts flowing and the food starts coming and people start talking about whose cousin works for whose uncle and whatever, suddenly they get closer to a deal. And so there's realization that just because you've got a new language, it doesn't mean that you're replacing word A with word B. It means that you're in a whole new market, a whole new set of people. And just like no one would say, as much as I hate the word millennials, everyone's talking about, how to market to millennials and how that's different to marketing to older people. Think about that, but double it or triple it when you're going into a new country.
Yeah.
And so you absolutely need interpreters and translators on side. You absolutely need local specialists on side. I know some interpreters and translators who do cultural consultancy, who will say to people, here's how to do business effectively in France or in Germany or Turkey or wherever. And that makes a big difference. But the skill set someone needs to train you in how to do good business in, say, Turkey or Germany is actually quite different to the skill set you need from someone who's going to allow you to be understood in those countries.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because even within the British Isles, there's quite a lot of difference in culture. When you're going to a completely different country altogether, I can imagine there's a lot of. I mean, I used to work for a big international organisation, and it was there was certain. If someone was based in a certain country, they'd be overly democratic and take forever to make a decision, for example, or they could be a bit blunt, and someone from X country and Y country might not get on very well, so you've got to sort of smooth it over if you're working on a project together. So I can see that as well in your marketing communications as well, getting that right, getting the right language that doesn't offend people, or it's right for it's not just a case of so I think I guess this is the difference between partly the difference between interpreting and and translation. It's not just a case of literally transliterating what you've got. You might need to put things in a completely different way. Is that right?
So classically, the difference between interpreting and translation is translators work with written language.
Yeah.
So someone even who's subtitling a corporate video would be a translator.
Yeah.
So anything that's complete before you send it to them.
Yeah.
If it's dealing with written language, that's translation. If it's dealing with spoken language or sign language, that's interpreting. And interpreters tend to, although the project I'm working on at the moment isn't doing this normally, but interpreters tend to be there while the meeting's going on or while the event's going on. Translators tend to come once the website is written. Now, modern translators, if you're talking about something in marketing, they're very close to copywriters.
Okay.
So if you send your website for translation to a very good website translator, not someone you might pick up on Fiverr or whatever, if you're sending it to someone with a record, don't be surprised if a marketing translator writes back and says, I can translate it, but here's how our website looks in our country. Or here's, for example, there's a classic one there's a page that has to be on every website that's aimed at clients in Germany that's not required in the UK.
Yep.
So a good website translator should be able to say to you, yes, I can turn your website into German, but if you're aiming at German clients, there's a legal requirement for websites that you have to fulfill. So I will need this information from you. I know one marketing translator who exclusively works in extreme sports. Extreme sports and water sports she does. And so she knows that sector incredibly well. And so when someone says, we've got this surfing website we need translated, she's not just, and a good translator doesn't just go this word to this word.
Yeah.
They're thinking about the client and the reader and what things are trying to do.
They might have to completely rewrite it, like, as you say, as a copywriter.
Yes, almost certainly. Whereas with interpreters, we do the same thing, but we do that on a 3-4 second delay maximum.
Yeah.
And so we are thinking, there's a running joke. So conference interpreters will tend to work in soundproof booths at the back of the room at big events and conferences. So there's a running joke that we're experts in reading how things are going by watching the backs of people's heads. But we have to be very, very good at reading a room, especially if you go from the conference world to business interpreting. Because in business interpreting, someone can say something and what they're meaning can be something different. And so you have to find this balance between, you can't make up stuff, you can't completely change what the person said, but you have to understand what that means in this context.
Yes. Yeah, because context is everything, isn't it? Yeah. And in different languages, the same word will mean multiple different things. But
one of my favorite incidents, which is on my website and in my second book, which I'll flash up later, I was doing a manufacturing interpreting job, and it was, have you ever heard of a sales qualification meeting?
Yeah.
So it was a sales qualification meeting where the French company wanted to buy from this specific British company.
Okay.
And they had to run through all of these legal and regulatory checks, and they had to check that the product was up to spec. And it was basically a questionnaire the guy was running through. And it turned out that the meeting almost went wrong because the French company were understanding quality as the percentage of pieces that were perfect. The British company were measuring quality as the percentage of pieces that had a flaw. So when the British company are saying our quality is 3% and the French company is saying, what?
That's horrendous.
And so it gets to halfway through the second day of these negotiations, and what had been a very pleasant, charming meeting. I mean, apart from the boring bit at the start where the British company insisted on doing a presentation on the history of their company, and I have no idea why people do that because it's pointless. Sorry, interpreter rant. Day 2, it starts getting angry, and so they start to walk out of the negotiating room poking at charts on the walls, and that's when things are going south, when we're poking at charts on the walls. And eventually I said, I think the interpreter thinks there's been a misunderstanding. May I explain? And I explained to both sides. 2 hours later, it was signed off. And so this is where a good interpreter isn't just saying what the speaker said, they're understanding what's going on.
Yeah.
But that takes, you can't always do that. So there are certain kinds of meetings where I would call in a colleague to do it because I'm not good at reading those meetings.
Right.
So what my favorite booth mate, we tend to work in teams of 2. My favorite booth mate is a finance specialist. So she can hear 1,000 figures and knows in her head what those figures mean and what's going on. I hear 1,000 figures and go, Laura. But this is, no one can be an expert in everything. And I think with my skill as a consultant interpreter is looking at the brief and going, who do I know who can deliver? Who have I worked? The bulk of the time, it's who have I worked with who can deliver. There are cases where you have to call in people that you haven't worked with, but you still have a network that you can find things out. If you're running an agency and you're getting, 1,000 queries a day, you just don't have time to have that market intelligence and go, oh, so-and-so is good, but they're not good at this, or so-and-so is really good, but hold on, we've got this kind of speaker. And making those very human decisions, you can only do at a certain scale.
Yes, it's a lot to think about, especially if it's real time. Yeah.
So I mean, like, you get high profile assignments, like I once did 14 minutes of interpreting a French musician being interviewed by the French Consul General at the Scottish Parliament, and my English was then being turned into Chinese as I was interpreting.
Oh my word.
Yes, very full Scottish Parliament debating chamber with culture ministers from all over the world. And I have a 14-minute shift late to end all 14-minute shifts. Because it was live webcast, it was transcribed, that's the kind of thing that you get dropped into sometimes.
Yeah, I'm always amazed. I mean, but partly because I'm so useless at languages, I barely cope with English. I'm just, my mind boggles the idea that you're listening, translating in your head, and then speaking, and it's all, but they haven't stopped speaking, so you still have to listen at this.
You're also monitoring yourself, and you're also reading the room at the same time.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So, I mean, we have classes, interpreter school. The first few weeks of interpreter school, you just go, you just think, how on earth am I going to do this? They ramp you up fairly slowly, but there's a tradition that around January, February time, they start giving the students the kind of things that you'll come across in real life. So things like speakers with strong accents, speakers going quickly, all the stuff. Speakers who say they're going to speak about one thing and speak about something different. If you train as a conference interpreter, most places will also train you in dialogue interpreting, which is what you use in a negotiation or a smaller meeting. And there are as many ways as that can go wrong as there are people in the world. And the thing is that in marketing, people tend to think, right, I can set a target, I can control the process, and if you're doing something written, the great thing about written words is they don't move. And so you have, here's what we've got to begin with, here's the target we're aiming at. You can map the process and you can track the process as it's going.
Yes, yeah.
In written translation, you can largely map and track the process. And in fact, there's been a lot of research mapping and tracking the process of written translation. With interpreting, the process itself is changing as you're interpreting.
Yeah.
So if you've ever been in a meeting that suddenly took a left turn, which I think most meetings nowadays tend to take sudden left turns, we have to be aware of that and know and try and work out where that left turn is going and is it going to come back round? Because if the French word order isn't that different to English, but my German colleagues could be waiting a long time for the verb, which tells them what the person's actually doing. So they're having to predict in advance, even whether this is a negative or a positive sentence, before they even know the ending of the sentence.
Right.
And so this is where the ideal for me is that if a client says, we've got a negotiation with a company in Japan or whatever, that they don't phone up or email 24 hours before and say, I need someone tomorrow.
Yeah.
which it's not frequent, but something like that happens more often than any interpreter would like, where you're going, maybe is the answer, maybe. Or even something as simple as they've already set up the event. They've already decided on the agenda. and they call it, the email a consultant interpreter and say, here's the agenda, here's, can you send us an interpreter? Because it could be, classic case of, I was once in a meeting where the finance talk came at 4:30 on the last conference. It's not a good time for finance talk. It's like, okay, it's 4:30. People are already looking at their watches, and here comes the accountant. Well,
unless that happens to be the sort of thing that excites you, which I guess isn't many of us.
But yeah, so it's kind of this balance between, you want a client to come with a clear brief, but you want there to be space as a consultant for you to say, right, let's talk about the how.
Yeah.
It's like, I guess it's the difference between someone coming to you and saying, here's what we want to achieve with, we want a social media campaign on Twitter and we want to do this. And you're like, maybe that's not the best way to reach 65-year-old people with dogs. It's kind of...
So that's some of the things you get involved with there, finding someone who can do translation for social media as well as...
It's whatever I get asked for.
Okay.
The great thing is that translation tools now, so interpreting, there's a lot of interpreting technology that's around, that it helps have someone who knows about it.
Yeah.
Translation technology is at the point where if you have something like a manual, you send it in the manual format to the translator, they use their special tools and it comes back reformatted, exactly aligned to go out to the client. So good translators are producing publication ready stuff without any need to kind of rip the text off a website and send them as text. You send them in HTML.
Handy.
They process it and it comes back ready laid out, because the tools that they have can extract text from just about anything and keep the tags. And it just locks the tags down and gives them what they need. Now, the issue with that is if you have a website and you say, well, this tag needs to be 100 characters long. 100 characters of English is very different to what you'll get over 100 characters of French or 100 characters of Chinese, and so again, it's anything to do with languages, flexibility is key. So someone might say, okay, we don't want to pay for simultaneous interpreting equipment, but we want the conference to last half a day. Well, then we would have to say to them, in that case, you're either only going to have a maximum of 5 people from each language that you can have at the conference, or you're going to have half the content.
Yeah.
And people are, but why? And you have to sit down, you explain carefully the different ways that interpreting can be provided at an event. And people suddenly realize, how do you know this stuff? It's like, because this is what I do.
You are the expert in this field.
I have a master's and PhD in this. If you ask me what the difference between simultaneous and consecutive interpreting is, I can tell you, and I can tell you in one line, I can tell you in a page, I can tell you in a PhD thesis. Take your pick. But this is where, it's, you never make the decision for the client, but you advise them as to where the key decision points are going to be.
Right.
And what so I would never say to a client, you absolutely have to have simultaneous interpreting. I would say, okay, you want to achieve this. If you do it with simultaneous, this is what's going to happen. If you do it with consecutive, this is what's going to happen. If you do it with whispered interpreting, this is what's going to happen. And, you can, if someone wants me to walk them through every option, I can. But normally I would just say, in this case, I would recommend this. But there are other possible options if you want to explore them. And most of the time, clients will go, can we just get it, please? And it's like, yeah, fine. But I have had occasions where I've had conversations with clients who've asked, but what if we want to do it? What if we don't want 2 interpreters? What if we only want 1? It's like, okay, we'll chat. And it's not that we want to take over. It's that we know the science, we know the practice. We know what 1 interpreter can do. We know what 2 interpreters can do. And we also know what interpreting simultaneously for more than half an hour does to your brain.
I can imagine it's hurting my brain just thinking about it.
We work in if we're doing simultaneous interpreting, we work in 20-minute to half an hour shifts. 20 minutes, if we're working remotely, is going to be 20 minutes. And that's because numerous studies have shown that after about 20 minutes, half an hour, the quality starts going downhill as your brain just goes, yeah, enough.
And so
you just have to say to people,
that makes perfect sense to me. It's a lot.
There have been people who've sat and had their brains scanned while they were interpreting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was, what year are we? 2020, I was in, no, end of 2019, I was in Geneva to celebrate 100 years of conference interpreting. And one of the speakers, his job is to brain scan interpreters. I'm like, cool.
That's very interesting.
Yes, it's when you get like a 3D drone style view of the inside of someone's brain, you go, I'm slightly slightly uncomfortable at seeing this closely into someone's brain now.
And is it there about the technology side of it? Are there things that if you're looking at entering a new market in a different, when they've got different language, different culture, is there technology that people also ought to start thinking about?
Yes. So we are currently in Zoom. Zoom Professional has an interpreting widget, if you like. If you're looking, so interpreting has, in the past year, the use of interpreting technologies has gone through the roof, because interpreting went from mostly in person to now mostly remote. So depending on what you want, you can use telephone interpreting, you can interpret via something like Zoom. There are now specialist remote simultaneous interpreting platforms for if you have a conference, you can plug that in and the interpreters then get an environment that's a lot more like where they're used to working. So if you imagine the difference that people felt from going from working in an office to working at home, interpreters had something similar from having our beloved interpreting consoles to, oh, we have a screen with buttons. And the newer, the better remote simultaneous environments have realized that and have made their environments as much like what we're used to working with as possible.
Okay.
And supporting multi-screen layouts and things so that we can look at the speaker and our notes and not have to go, where am I? There's also, and this is increasingly being a question that people are asking, there's also machine interpreting. So I did write Interpreters versus Machines, available from all good bookstores. And machine interpreting is doing things that no one expected it to do. So for instance, if you have a client that's saying, actually, what we really need is we really need people to get access to something. For example, if it's emergency medicine, or you have a client that has a lot of customer facing interaction on a large scale.
Yeah.
As I co-host a podcast, and we had a guy from a machine interpreting company on there saying it's not feasible to produce interpreting at certain scales. You just can't get enough good human interpreters, or if you can, the price is just expensive.
Yeah.
So there are occasions where if you need if you like a kind of customer service triage, then there are machine interpreting, there are kind of translation chat things that you can use that will allow you to do kind of some basic customer service triage at scale. But then when it comes down to the sales conversation or the interaction with a representative or something that's where there's real value being exchanged, you bring in a human. And you bring in a human using whatever technology or platform works. So if you have a conference where everyone is sitting at home, there is no there for the interpreters to be. So you want to look at remote interpreting and you want to ask the question very early on to an agency or a consultant, are you independent of the platforms, or are you always going to use the same one? Because I know at least one agency in Scotland that have paired up with a platform. Whereas as a consultant, I'm platform agnostic. I just go with, right, let's figure out what the best one is here. And I know guys and ladies from different platforms, and I can ask the hard questions. But a client needs to know very quickly if they're going to be dragged into being forced to use a platform. That might not be right for them.
Yep. Marketing agencies do the same.
Yes. Whereas consultant interpreters don't have deals with platforms normally. And so even there might be an occasion where, if someone's working in something in Germany, My job isn't to win the job. My job is to get the client the best service possible. So if they're doing something in Germany and they're doing remote interpreting there, the first thing I would do would be to send them straight to colleagues I know in Germany who are consultant interpreters there.
Yeah.
Because they know the local market way better than I ever could, and they know which platforms work best for that kind of market. But because interpreting technology has gone through the roof in the past year and everything has changed so much, it's gone beyond the point where you can expect a reasonable non-interpreting human being to know enough about the technology to make a wise decision. And even some consultants, I mean, even me as a consultant, at times there are certain questions I would go, hold on a minute, and get someone who works for a specific platform to say, can you integrate with X? Because that's not information that I always have to hand. My job isn't to know everything. My job is to know the right person to ask sometimes if I don't know. And to know enough to say to clients, well, okay, you've got this negotiation, and actually, here's the kind of solution that would be natural in that position. When it comes to plugging it into Zoom or whatever events platform they're using, that's a conversation I then have with the platform themselves and say, okay, let's see how we can do this. But it's getting to the point where people are having to really specialize. And if the specialists are having to further specialize, then what clients really need to know about the technology is there's lots of it. It's complicated. Not everything talks to everything else at the moment. We're at that stage of development. So talk to a consultant early and find people who are not in the pay of a certain platform.
I'm guessing that's not always obvious.
If you ask, people should tell you. So if someone said to me, for example, if someone said to me, do you have a preferred, there are remote interpreting studios set up around the UK and around the world. If someone says to me, do you have a preferred remote interpreting studio? The answer is yes. And that's always, if I need to use a remote interpreting studio, there's only one I'm going to use. It's not that I've got to deal with them, it's just they're the best. It's just, if someone says, who do you know who's good at supplying interpreting equipment, wherever they are in the UK, I'll give them the same phone number. Because there's a company that I work with and there aren't any kickbacks, but they're just brilliant. So I don't care that there are no kickbacks because I know the job's going to go well. But my thought is people are duty bound to tell you if they're receiving a kickback or they've got an exclusive deal. Ask up front, have you got a deal with? And it could be useful because it might mean that you get money off. It could also lock you into stuff that you don't really need or want. So as soon as you're sending the brief across, and I've got a blank brief that I say to people, fill in this kind of blank brief so that you're not getting tons of email, send that across, and with the brief say, do you have any exclusive deals? Are you tied into a contract with? And if they're not willing to tell you, you shouldn't be willing to work with them.
Yeah, they're being cagey. There's a reason.
If on the other hand they say, yes, we do, it's with X, then that's fine. At least they're honest.
Yeah.
If they say something like that's commercially sensitive information, then the answer is, thank you very much, I'll go elsewhere.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting tips there to think about. Yep. So do you ever get involved with, do you ever get to a point with a client you say, you need to have, or advise them, it might be best now to have someone based in France. You need an office in France because the level of work is just getting ridiculous. It'd be cheaper to have, French speakers in France doing business for you.
I haven't got to that yet, but it's a point that I would be quite happy to get to with a client. So there's a classic thing. The House of Lords a few years ago said that there was a report, released a report saying that British companies lose out on £50 billion worth of contracts a year because of lack of language skills.
I can imagine we're rubbish. I mean, you're not.
So, yeah, but so there's a point where there's a famous translation scholar called Anthony Pym who did this study, and he talks about the point where interpreting and translation aren't your best option. Learning the language is your best option. And I've never seen a client get to that, but I think it's the point where if I was seeing there was recurring work and it was the same internal meetings all the time, I would begin to say, actually, maybe you should have an office in France. It's not that I want to lose a client, you know, I love clients, but also as an interpreter, and especially as a consultant interpreter, I am very conscious of where I'm providing value.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you're doing a lot of marketing for the same company that's just recurring stuff that you could automate, the value that you're providing has gone down. And so if I'm doing the same meetings, I know some interpreters who love doing the same meetings all the time. But, you know, if you're doing the same internal meetings all the time and you're practically being able to predict what people are saying, there's nothing new coming and it's routine stuff, then there should be a point where you say, am I providing value anymore? You know, can I provide more value by actually handing over to a local specialist to set them up an office?
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that I'll never work with them again, because, you know, they might have been working in France and they go, oh, now we want to go to Germany, and the process repeats.
And they're more likely to recommend you as well because they can trust you.
Yes. My job is not to suck as much money out of a client as possible.
Yeah.
Now, do I like getting more money from clients? Yes. Am I aware that in the UK, interpreters' fees tend to be lower than they are elsewhere? Yes. But by the same token, I'm not doing my profession any good if I'm continuing to provide a service where it's not really needed. And this is where, actually, this comes down to my PhD. I was looking at kind of 3 different approaches to interpreting, and there is an approach to interpreting that's just, we have it because it looks good, or it's because it's politically nice. And every interpreter that I spoke to about that is like, yeah, we've been in meetings like that. It's like, yes, just because we've been in meetings like that doesn't mean that they're a good thing. And it's like, you know, the companies who want a flashy website written in Flash, you know, a flashy website with lovely graphic, you know, with amazing graphics, it takes 10.5 minutes to load. There's literally, you know, it looks pretty, but it serves no purpose. And it's getting to the point where you're honest enough to say, I know this looks pretty. And I've never gotten there, and I hope I never do get there, because it's a difficult conversation to have. But yeah, it's providing the right service that the client needs then. And sometimes it's not necessarily the one the client asks for. I had a client at one point saying, oh, we really need interpreters, we really need interpreters. And when I sat down on the phone and talked to them, it turned out that they didn't need interpreters, they needed subtitlers. And it is not, you know, people don't know the difference. And I'm not surprised, because I've been in this industry 12 years. And I have to continually, you know, my association has a thing for tracking your continued professional development.
Yeah.
If I'm not on top of my continued professional development, you fall behind within months nowadays. Because the technology changes so quickly. That there's a whole new branch of interpreting technology coming out that I need to start getting my nose into, that's going to help us do our job more efficiently. But I just haven't had time to look into it, because it's not something that I need every day.
Yep.
But my colleagues in other countries where they need to be able to do certain things every single day, they've jumped into it headlong, and I'm like, hold on. I'm just back from paternity leave. I will get to it. But because it's technology for a need that I don't have every day. It's not an urgent thing. Whereas things like understanding client needs, being able to manage complex projects, that I need every day.
Yes.
That I absolutely need. And even continuing to work on asking the right questions. I thought I knew how to ask the right questions, and it turns out, no, you learn that every day, how to ask the right questions. And what was the right question a month ago isn't the right question today. But that's just people for you. That's just life.
Yeah.
And everyone thought they knew what they were doing, and then the pandemic hit.
Oh, yes. That was fun.
But the thing is that, like, we're kidding ourselves. So this is marketing related. There's a principle that people tend to think about marketing, which is the more that you do, the better the results you get. That's not actually true.
Yeah, it's not as simple as that.
No.
It really isn't.
I had someone tell me, you know, you can't be successful in business unless you do 60-hour weeks. I'm like, No.
No.
One of my measures of success is that I'm not doing 60-hour weeks.
Yeah, I mean, surely we part of the reason you go out on your own is that is getting the balance right and wanting to get some of your life back. It's not a case of, I mean, it doesn't, even you're self-employed, there are going to be weeks where you might end up doing a 60-hour, but then the next week you have off and recover, you know.
Yes, but this is, you know, the pandemic taught us that business is not simply cause and effect.
No.
It's not that if you do X, Y will happen and you make Z amount of money. That's not business. You know, it might be the kind of business that sells people on that people sell online courses about, you know, buy my system. But that's not how business works. Business is about human beings, you know, interpreting is about human beings. I used to have this kind of catchphrase motto thing, it is in the book, where I said, when I started interpreting, I thought it was language skills with people attached. Now I realise that it's people skills with language attached.
Yes. I suspect that's the case with pretty much every industry.
All the stuff you learn in uni
is the psychology of the people you're dealing with that has a huge effect. Yeah.
Well, there's the thing is that everyone goes out to get the technical skills, and they matter. You know, I'm not going to say the technical skills don't matter, but the technical skills are what you deliver using the people skills.
Yes.
If you don't have the people skills, everyone knows every area of business, and you know, we cannot possibly name names, but everyone knows people in their line of business that have the most off the charts technical skills, but have the people skills of a wet plank of wood.
Yes.
And so you know that you either can't possibly work with them, or you can only work with them under very specific circumstances. And, you know, everyone knows that person. And, you know, as I'm saying this, people are watching this video going, he's talking about Bob, or he's talking about Amy, or he's talking. I'm not talking about anyone in specifically. I'm just saying this is true.
Yeah.
And so you can have, I mean, even in interpreting, I have the vast majority of interpreters have excellent people skills, because if we don't, we can't work. Simple as that.
Yeah.
But I have some colleagues who, if you have a technical meeting, so like, you know, there's once we did a job on demolition. I have interpreters who I would send to any demolition, any technical meeting. I don't care what your factory makes. This is the team I'm sending because they're just brilliant at technical stuff. I wouldn't put them within 5 miles of a sales meeting.
Yes.
Because they're wonderful technical people. Or even everyone's been to that conference where you have the speaker who's a frustrated Hollywood director. It takes a certain kind of interpreter to deliver that and not sound completely crazy. And you have to choose. I have one colleague who loves doing motivational speakers. And he could do the rah-rah stuff and get the people as excited in his language as the speaker did. I know some interpreters who would turn a motivational talk into an accounting talk. That's just how they work.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, like, you know, some marketers are great at B2C, but give them B2B and they fall apart.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Yeah, it's yes. Yeah. Or run a mile because they just don't want to do it because they find it boring.
I'm not going to say anything about boring assignments because this is going out. but you know, my thing is to clients, if you've ever sat in a meeting and thought, this meeting is so bad, I feel like stripping down to shorts and t-shirt and running outside. Okay, we feel that too, but we can't leave. And, you know, the kind of meetings where you're playing Candy Crush on your phone, we want to do that too, but we have to keep working.
And you mentioned that fees in the UK aren't particularly great compared to other countries. Do you think that's because we don't really value it? We just assume that everyone else speaks English.
It's part of that. Fees are beginning to come back up. So like at the top end, they're beginning to match other countries. In the kind of middle and the bottom, they're just not. The reason why fees tend to be lower in the UK is a couple of things. One, that every interpreter that I know in the UK is an interpreter, and so they'll be an interpreter and a translator or an interpreter and a teacher, or in my case, I'm a consultant interpreter, so I'm an interpreter and a researcher.
Yeah.
And so because they're interpreters and there's a different way of going about business than if you're somewhere like, Paris, where interpreting is everything that you do and you're kind of flooded with assignments all day, every day. The reason why the top end fees are actually beginning to creep up to where I would say they should be is because even those who are interpreters and are seeing where the market is going and seeing that the need is growing. So I recently wrote a paper talking about the post-Brexit, what Brexit's going to do to interpreting in the UK. And from what the government have said about the new immigration regulations, we're going to have what you call a supply shock, where suddenly there's more demand than there is supply. Because if you imagine that, a lot of events in the UK, you'll be using interpreters who are based in the UK, but they may originally be from Tajikistan, Germany, Luxembourg, whatever.
Yeah.
Now, when you had a situation where free movement from the EU was fine, someone could train in France, move to the UK, no problem. Nowadays, if they train in France and they want to move to the UK, you can't move to the UK under the current regulations. From what I can see, you can't move to the UK to start a business. You have to move to the UK with a job offer.
Yeah.
When almost all interpreters are freelancers, that creates a supply shock. And so I think now that the Brexit deal is done, I think more companies are looking at going abroad. Conference interpreters certainly are beginning to specialize more because, if someone's got a medical conference, I have to send them a medical conference interpreter. I don't have a choice. It's not going to work otherwise.
Yeah.
And there are becoming to be enough medical conferences, especially with the advent of remote interpreting, where the interpreter can be anywhere, that is worth specializing. And so you're seeing some interpreters' prices haven't crept up yet, but I think they will do soon, because when you get a supply shock, the natural thing for interpreters to do when they're overwhelmed is, and for any business to do when you're overwhelmed, is I need to get my prices up to give me that gap to get my life back. And to be able to deliver, you can't deliver high level content 7 days a week. You can't do it. You cannot do, if you tried to do 365 days of interpreting in a year, something would go wrong at some point. So I explain to clients, we have a day of preparation for every day of the meeting. Roughly. Sometimes more, sometimes less. So if they've got a 2-hour meeting, they need to bank on the interpreters taking 2-3 hours to prepare. If they've got a 4-day conference, we need 4 days to prepare. And so what do you do when suddenly supply contracts?
Yeah.
And, interpreting went really quiet for a while, and now it's creeping, it's coming back. And the UK's historically had lower prices. I can't see that lasting for long, because it's had lower prices because we've been able to get the supply and people have been able to move across quite freely. You close that door, especially when in-person events come back strong. I'm saying this here, and I don't think I've said this before. When in-person events start coming back at full pelt, even in-person business meetings, if you don't book your interpreters early, you might not get them, because
that's some good advice there.
I would say so. It used to be we'd say to clients, book us 2 weeks to a month in advance. I would now say to clients, talk to the consultant as soon as you've booked the venue. Get a consultant interpreter. Arguably even before you've finalized the plenary speakers, as soon as you've got a rough agenda and the venue is booked, get your consultant in, because they can then start talking to interpreters and start booking time. Because if you get a slippage in your timeline, I'm finding it harder when things slip. I'm finding it that interpreters are less able to have the flexibility that they sometimes had, because they might just be booked. And I know interpreters who are on the UN list. If the UN call you, you go. So it's kind of like, right, so we're now having to think, really, you're going to have to start thinking more in advance. You're going to have to start thinking about what kind of supplier you want to work with really far in advance. So just, phone the agency 2 days before, it's not going to work anymore.
Yeah. That's an excellent tip. If you've got a marketing event that's going to require other languages, speak to Jonathan now.
Yes, because things are getting crazy. but also, like, if you're doing marketing and you think, so one place where I've seen events not take advantage of what's available. Say you have a marketing event, your product launch is a classic case. You have a product launch and you're launching it in 4 countries.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't care whether you're doing it as an in-person event or a remote event or a whole bunch of advertising videos, product launches. If you're going into 4 countries, you're going to need all the languages. Classically, I've seen things where people have showcased something and they've said, well, we're going to have the speech interpreted and or we're going to have the event interpreted and there you go. But you've got the whole marketing value chain. And actually, if you've got a consultant interpreter, the good ones, no translators.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm quite happy, and I've got a project on at the moment. I'll be arranging translation for parts of it soon. If someone says to me, "Oh, we've got a product launch, can we have the websites done and the event interpreted?" Well, that's fine, because that's a service that I can arrange. And it makes sense because then, while the translators are translating the website and getting your copyright, that can be passed directly to the interpreters, who then feed that into the copy that they're speaking. If you separate those two, and the classic agency model is to separate translation and interpreting because they're managed very differently.
Yeah.
The information from the translators might not get to the interpreters, and they might be emailing to say, "Oh, what does this term mean?" And they're like, "Well, the translators have already fixed that."
Yeah.
But no one's told them.
Yeah, I can see that sort of crossover and being really useful to understand what the other side is doing. Yeah.
Yeah, and like, if okay, you've got a video coming out, even talking to a consultant and say, should we dub this or subtitle it? I know audio-visual translation experts that I can email within 5 minutes and say, okay, they're going into X country. Is that a dubbing country or a subtitling country?
Yes, because if you go abroad, sometimes you see an English film or something, but it's been dubbed over. I just think that would drive me nuts personally. But yeah, certain countries prefer that.
And so then if it's dubbing, then that's a completely different process. And it's these things that, unless you know what you're looking for, or you have things like, I had a client recently ask, we're doing some event, can interpreters handle a question and answer session? And they thought it would be a really big issue. And I'm like, no, that's something that we do practically every time we're interpreting. There will be a Q&A session. And they're like, oh, but they're interpreting using Zoom. I was like, okay, let's work through how this is going to work. And we came up with a system that was right for that client. And that was just the end of last year. And I'm like, oh, but I didn't. And so it's not, the answer isn't always, yes, we can do this. It's actually, let's work out how we're going to do this. Most of the time, the answer isn't going to be, no, you can't do it unless you phone me 2 days before you need it. That's all. But, if you give people enough time, the answer is really very, very rarely going to be no. It's usually going to be, let's work out how.
Yeah.
And let's work out, within the budget. My favorite budget is it just needs done. I love the budget. It just needs done. Yeah. That's my favorite budget. But, the budget that says we've got X £1,000 and we want to do that, if someone says, we've got £2,000, we want to do this, I'm like, sometimes yes, sometimes some things just don't cost £2,000. If someone said, we need 12 interpreters working simultaneously at a conference and we've got a budget of £2,000, the answer to that is going to be no.
Yeah, I can see that straight away.
No. £2,000 is the cost of the equipment for 2 interpreters. No, no. But but that's where you have to have the conversation. And I don't know if there's a common thing in business. I'm beginning to come away from and think about rejecting clients who come with, here's exactly what we want done. Who don't send a brief, who send a list. They don't send a brief, they send a ransom note. And so Another tip, if you need something in different languages, any service provider that says they can give you an instant quote, I would be very wary of. So, for example, instant quote in the interpreting world is crazy because different interpreters different languages cost different amounts of money. That's just specialisms cost different amounts of money. That's the whole thing. Instant quote in translation means that they have set a fee that they will pay the translators, and that fee is not going to change according to the job.
Yeah, so they can only they'll get whoever they can afford, not who's right for the job.
Yes. So an instant quote in translation usually means they have a set fee. So, for example, I have some colleagues who are specialist legal translators, one of whom is a former practicing barrister. He's not going to charge the same as someone who says they can do legal translation because they've listed it on a random website.
Yes. Yeah.
And, if someone says they need a medical translator, if it's a case of a life and death thing of they need to get these medical records right because they need to figure out which drugs to give the person, that needs a different process than someone just wants to know, they're just curious or whatever. Or the classic one, which tends not to happen in interpreting, what happens in translation is we need this for regulatory purposes. Means it's going in a cupboard. And, if someone can give you an instant quote, it means they're not thinking about what you need.
Yeah.
If on the other hand, they say, give me a couple of days and I'll get back to you, that's more helpful.
Mm.
And my classic is, spend time getting the right brief, then I'll say, okay, I will put together the right team and I'll come back to you in 2-3 days or whatever, depending on how, if it's 20 interpreters, 2-3 days is not going to cut it. But, if it's, for talking sake, if someone says, we need French for, and it happens to be something that I'm happy to interpret myself, I can probably give them a relatively instant quote.
Yeah.
Because, I know what I would charge for that. I know I can,
Yes.
I can have a phone call with the AV guys, that's fine. If, on the other hand, someone's wanting 6 languages, medical specialists, that's, I have the contact, but but what I don't necessarily have is the time, because if you're needing medical specialists in 6 languages, the problem is they're probably already at a conference when I'm emailing them. They're not sitting twiddling their thumbs. They're out working. So if I email them at 9 a.m., I might not get a reply until 5. It's just...
Yeah.
So it would be a fallacy to say I can just pluck a number out there and say there it is. Every project's different. And so stay away from instant quotes. Stay away from, we have thousands of people. It's like, yeah, and you don't know any of them.
Yes. Yep.
We have thousands of suppliers. Yeah, name one.
Yeah, okay.
And the other one is, if you're working with anyone in the UK, there is now a gold standard in the UK for, if they're a consultant interpreter, they should have membership of a professional association.
Oh, that's useful to know.
So in the UK, internationally, there's an association called AIC, AIIC. A lot of consultant interpreters are members of AIC. In the UK, you have the Institute of Translation and Interpreting and the Chartered Institute of Linguists. For commercial stuff, those are the 3 that you need to be aware of. When it comes to legal, that's a whole other ballgame. Talk to a consultant, they'll sort it out. Legal is the National Register of Public Service Interpreters. A lot of legal interpreters will be on there. Or the Association of Police and Court Interpreters. But that's it. But basically, ITI, CIOL, and AIC are the 3 that you need to know for individuals.
Yeah.
If it's a company of any sort, so I would refuse to work with an agency that's either not in the Institute of Translation and Interpreting themselves or in the Association of Translation Companies. Because those are the 2 associations. And someone asked me once, why do you say you wouldn't work with an agency that's not in one of those 2? Well, the reason is because if they've signed up to the ATC or ITI, they've signed the Code of Conduct.
Yeah.
So if something goes pear-shaped, there's a system that allows you to flag up this has gone pear-shaped.
Yes.
And they know they're being watched.
And then presumably anyone can set themselves up and call themselves an interpreter. It doesn't necessarily mean they know what they're doing or have the qualification.
Well, also, like I happen to know a list of the universities that train conference interpreters really well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So if I'm, 90 odd % of the time I'm working with people that I've already worked with or recommended by those I've already worked with, it's otherwise I will use my knowledge of the training system and I'll use my knowledge of the associations to ferret out the good people. And so like if someone's an ITI member, and especially if they've got like they're what's called qualified member status at an MITI, the MITI exam, especially for translation, is hard, and the new interpreting exam is hard. If someone's got if someone's a translator and they've got MITI, it's a tough exam and it's done under realistic conditions. So they get it as if they would get a real assignment and they have to return it like a real assignment. And the markers are fellow translators, and translators are, by nature, they will spot anything wrong. And so, you work with someone who's in an association, they know they're being watched, they're accountable. All of the associations now are promoting continued professional development.
Yeah.
So then you're coming to someone, and it's not just that they've got a piece of paper, a diploma, or whatever, get someone trained for goodness sake, but it's that they've decided off their own back to pay the time and the money to show the world that they care about what they're doing. And you start seeing things as well. I love it when people Google me now, because Google have given me the little sidebar. But you should be able to find out a decent amount about anyone you're going to work with, especially if a consultant interpreter isn't findable online. Something's wrong, because they need to be. But you can tell a lot by the way that they approach their website, the way that they approach their communications. But yes, certainly always go for someone who's in an association. Always go for someone who, so there's a very famous finance translator called Chris Durbin who says that great translators ask questions. And it's the same with interpreters. If you ask someone for a quote and they just send you an amount back and say, it'll be there by Tuesday, worry. Because maybe you've got a better experience with this than me, but I've never, ever, ever seen perfect information on the first query email. I now have a blank brief that I send out to people because the first query email never has everything you need.
No, I mean, yeah, anything. I always have discovery meetings with clients to get in the, because sometimes, quite often, they think they know what they want. They don't.
Yes. You have to do the Spice Girl thing of tell me what you want, what you really, really want.
Yeah, it's what are you actually trying to achieve? Not, I think I need X, Y, and Z a lot of the time, yeah.
And also, there's a difference between a lot of the goals that people set are numeric goals.
Yep.
And there's a business coach that I've come across called Ewan Mingus who says that mostly when people set numeric goals, it encourages bad behavior. So, I mean, there's a classic social psychology study of, they told, there's a company that told their salesman, you have to get X, I don't know, was it 100 sales this month. So all the salesmen went out and got 100 really low value sales.
Yeah, they'll play the game. I've worked with a lot of sales guys over the years, and they'll do whatever it is they need to do to get their bonus.
Yeah. So
not
if you say 100 sales,
even if that's not necessarily what's right for the company. So you've got to really think these things through.
If you tell someone get 100 sales, each sale will be worth 99 pence, and it'll be a Mars bar every time. And so, like, if someone says, if someone can reply to a query email with a quote, they haven't thought it through properly. And it's, if someone's coming to say, here's the event we want to deliver, the best question is, why do you want to deliver it? What are you trying to achieve? And it's the question on my blank brief that is most often left out. And it's the one that I almost always have to go back with. So on every brief that I send out, what's the purpose of this event? And it's either left blank, or you get to tell people stuff. And you take your glasses off and you go, right, now I'm ready to deal with this.
Yeah, that brings back memories from dealing with product managers. Well, you want to do a campaign and like, well, why? What are you trying to achieve? More sales. Okay. How many more? Just more. So one more sale of a single product? I don't think so. What are you trying to achieve? So yeah, that I'm sure everyone's experienced that at some point.
Or, who are the audience for this event?
Yeah.
People.
Yeah. Oh, that one as well. Who's going to be interested in this product? Everyone. I doubt it. Who are you targeting? Everyone in the database. No.
Well, I say this when I first started networking some years ago.
Yeah.
I had all these kind of bad beliefs about business in my head, and I went to one networking event, and someone said to me, "Oh, so what is it you do?" And I kid you not, my answer was, "Anything I get paid for." It didn't take me long to realize that wasn't the best response. Because at the time, early in your business, you take on any client who's breathing and who has money.
It's very tempting to do that, isn't it?
And so I was doing translation, I was doing proofreading, I wasn't doing much interpreting at the very beginning. I was doing translation, proofreading, I was doing writing, I was doing blah, blah, blah. And, anything vaguely languagey, I was having a go at. And it took a while for the interpreting work to build up. But once the interpreting work built, once I started getting interpreting work, I realized actually it's not just that I'm a conference interpreter, it's that I'm a conference interpreter and there are things that I'm better at than others.
Yeah.
And there are, I really loved, a couple of years ago, I got the chance to do some rugby interpreting, and that was great fun. But I realized that I tend to do best when it's the kind of meeting where the client comes in and their palms are sweating and they're reaching for a coffee to get you because it's so high pressure.
Mm.
I was like, great. Whereas I realized that the routine stuff isn't something, I can do it. It's just not what I shine in.
Yeah.
Whereas I have colleagues who, they love the routine AGM minute detail stuff. I love if this meeting goes pear-shaped, we're all in trouble. That I like.
Yeah, we're all best at certain things. It's understanding yourself and knowing what to outsource or what to pass to someone else. Yeah.
Well, also realizing that different people need different things at different times. There are times when you need a Twitter campaign, and there are times where you actually need to sit down and go, well, what does the product do? Because there are companies who sell products, I'm not sure they actually know what they do.
Yes, I think you're probably right.
Or the other one, whether, we're selling this and they're not aware that 1,000 other people are selling the same thing.
Yep.
It's the classic one, network marketing and multi-level marketing. It's the classic problem that anyone in that area faces, is there are literally thousands of people selling the same product at exactly the same price.
Mm. The differentiation is nigh on impossible. Yeah.
Yeah. So where, finding your place and being able to say what it is you do. And I had one, I've got a colleague who works in marketing and advertising stuff, and she said, clients have meetings for weeks on marketing slogans.
Mm.
And then they send it to the translator and say, can we have it in 5 minutes?
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine. Yeah.
She's so, you never ever pay per word for a marketing slogan, because that took them 6 weeks. They had all their brains together for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I get at least a few hours, please?
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine, because and like you said, it's redoing it. It's not a case of just going, word for word, because as a whole, it might have a slightly different meaning. So, and to that culture, it might. So it's not as simple as, oh, it's only 5 words.
There was a drinks company recently who wanted to bring their product to the UK, and their product name was Jobby.
Yeah. Enough said, I think.
we don't need to translate that to realize the problems.
Yes.
But this is, and so you multiply that 1,000 times and you get the result of, someone comes to a meeting and thinks they know what they're doing. Someone's, I know we're kind of running over time, we need to cut this down, but the classic one for me was at this I was at a big technical conference. There was 6 or 8 of us interpreting because we work in teams of 2, and there was two Italian delegations there from, I believe, rival companies, although it wasn't entirely clear. They both get a chance to showcase the work that they're doing. Wonderful. The first group went, well, we kind of speak English, so we'll do our presentation in English and showcase our work in English. And it was, despite the fact there were Italian interpreters there, it was, if you've ever been in a meeting where everyone suddenly needs to check the time on their phone after the first 3 minutes, it was like that, only for 20 minutes long. I'm sure that people knew every second that passed. And, you know, they come down from the stage and they get the polite, "We're glad you're finished" clap that people do. And the other Italian delegation looked at that and went, that doesn't look good. So they got up and decided to present in Italian. So my Italian colleagues turned their Italian into English. The rest of us, so we then heard the English and turned the English into French. The Dutch turned it into Dutch. And I think there was a Spanish team there turned it to Spanish. So there's a bit of a delay, but it was an incredibly technical but incredibly emotive presentation, because it was talking about recovering from a certain disaster, which I can't name because you would know who it was, recovering from this disaster that had happened. And the Italian interpreters did some of the best interpreting I've ever heard in my career. We had the honour of turning that into the other languages, and that Italian delegation not only got a standing ovation at the conference, when it came break time and you had all of the stands, the guys who tried it themselves without really, no one was there because no one had a clue what they did, because no one understood what they said. The Italian delegation who decided to be brilliant in their language and let the interpreters deal with that, you couldn't get to their stand. And it's a classic case of, you get the interpreting right, and I don't care how much you've paid, your return's going to be much more than you've paid.
Yeah. Well, this has all been really fascinating. So yeah, thank you for all that information. It's really, really useful stuff in there. And you briefly showed your book. Tell us what you've got to plug.
So I have Interpreters versus Machines is a great book if you've never heard of interpreting. I explain what interpreting is and what it isn't in there. I've got a couple of funny made up stories in there as well. My book is a great thing to buy. Also, if you go to my website, integritylanguages.co.uk, there's some helpful stuff on there that's going to get a redesign soon, but please visit now anyway. And also the main thing that I have to plug is I've been putting together, I put together just before I went on paternity leave, I put together a guide for kind of the remote interpreting world. So if you want to get that, drop me an email, go into the website, drop me an email, and I can send it to you, because I realized that interpreting is confusing if you've never been in the interpreting world. And so the main thing that I have to plug is me. It's my job to keep on top of the complexity, and so that from the client side, they don't see any of that. All they see is beautiful interpreting that gets them results that they couldn't even have imagined. So the main thing is just, if you, especially my main target clients are people in industry, manufacturing, technical industries, and also events management companies. So if you need to just take the complexity out of interpreting and get someone else to handle it for you and work with you to get the right solutions to get you the results you need, come and see me.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, check out Jonathan's links, which I will put on YouTube and on my website where I'll be hosting this video. And yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you.
It was great to see you.